But all the love in the world couldn't take away the difficulties of growing up in the public eye. When the show was popular, it was easy to forget that the cast, especially Day, was going through the normal teenage feelings that any kid would. There were hormones, unspoken desire, and a feeling of being alone in the face of huge fame. Later, Day herself said that even though she was close with her co-stars, the show's huge popularity made it hard to keep real ties with them. The group slowly started to grow apart because of the stresses of fame and their growing personal differences. These differences would only get worse over time. One of these problems was that Day's friendship with David Cassidy was not going well. They played perfect brothers off-screen while they were on-screen. You could feel the strain between them. They were both rising stars and each had a strong fan group. But as Day's fame grew, Cassidy's fame turned out to be a bad thing. Fans' love for them grew stronger, and with it came the obvious comparisons. There was a fine line between their public personas and their private lives that both artists had to walk, a task that made things more than a little awkward behind the scenes. There were big differences between Day and Cassidy. Cassidy was more outgoing, while Day was quiet and thought about things. The cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship got bigger as Day lost faith in what people expected of her and the stress of always being Lori Partridge. Under the surface of their on-screen chemistry, there were times when they were angry or frustrated that they didn't talk about. At the time, these issues were never made public, but they would come up again and again over the years. It was hard for the group to deal with the effects of their time on the Partridge family. Even so, Day's role as Lori Partridge lived on. People knew her and liked her because of how well the show did. She was a young woman trying to figure out how to deal with fame, family, and her own identity. But the part that everyone expected her to play made her feel lost. The complicated friendship between Susan and David. As the years went by and the Partridge family became a famous part of American TV history, Susan Day's love for her co-star David Cassidy grew in ways that she herself couldn't fully understand at the time. It wasn't just a short-lived crush, at least not the kind that fans might have thought. Not at all. Susan's emotions were complicated, strong, and mixed with the stresses of growing up in the public eye. Being a star, David Cassidy was the center of attention for millions of people, and Susan found herself standing just a bit closer to him, sharing private jokes, times between takes, and an emotional bond that went beyond the screen. She had seen David grow from a teen hero to the star that everyone loved, but David's charm was what kept her on David's side, even as she tried to hold back her feelings. David, who was already very aware of how popular he was among teens, kept her at a safe distance most of the time. The very nature of their show, where innocence was paramount and any hint of romance was discouraged, made it difficult for either of them to explore the deeper feelings that simmered beneath the surface. Even though David seemed charming and sure of himself, he didn't want to get too close to anyone, especially Susan, who was not only his co-star but also a girl with her own problems. But it was impossible to ignore how Susan felt. They slowly grew together as she got to know David better as a friend and an admirer, going beyond the chemistry they had on screen. As the show became more popular and went on quick tours, people always wanted to see the perfect family. But Susan didn't talk about her private pain because she didn't want to ruin her image. Even though David was flirty and fun with her sometimes, they never got serious about being together. He later admitted that it was easier for him to keep his distance because he was worried that their relationship would hurt the show's public image, which it was trying so hard to keep up. Because Susan felt emotionally far away, it hurt and confused her, one that she couldn't fully explain, even as it made her heart ache. Even though they never said it out loud, the refusal was there in the silence between them. Over the years, Susan Day's feelings for David would stay hidden, unspoken, unresolved, and sucked down by the noise of fame and the demands that were put on both of them. She didn't know how to take care of the quiet wound at the time. She used her broken heart in her acts, making sure that she always looked as calm and collected as she could. While inside, she dealt with the difficulties of love that wasn't returned. For a long time, her connection with David Cassidy shaped her early adult life. Even though they never got married, a tie that made them long for each other, but was never fully restored. In the years that followed, Susan tried to stay away from the show and the stress of always being linked to Lori Partridge. She did this by burying the feelings she had for David. In the background, though, that secret pain would never go away. The big idea that changed everything. As time went on and the Partridge Family became a romantic TV show, the actors who had played the parts started to look for new things to do with their lives. For Susan Day, this meant making a name for herself in TV and movies, away from the attention of Lori Partridge. She became famous for her parts in more serious, adult shows, which were very different from the silly fun sitcoms that made her famous in the first place. For David Cassidy, though, the past stayed a big part of his life, even though he tried to move on. Even though he was dealing with personal problems, his career kept being built around the idea of being a teen hero. Cassidy wrote his autobiography, Could It Be Forever?, in February 2007, and said that it was his story of the past. In the book, Cassidy wrote about his life at the height of his fame, including his relationships with co-stars and fans, as well as the inner turmoil that came with being a hero. But among the many surprises hidden in the chapters, one moment stood out. Someone confessed something that shocked both his readers and the people in the story. Cassidy said that he and Susan Day had spent the night together during the time they worked together on the Partridge Family. The night was talked about in general terms, a quick moment that seemed to bother him as much as it had changed the way they were together. But for Susan, the realization wasn't just a brief part of a book. It was a breach of trust that would change the course of their relationship for good. Susan had spent decades separating herself from her Partridge Family image and the emotional scars of her childhood. Cassidy's words caught her off guard. She had made a life for herself in the years after the show's end, one that wasn't based on what other people thought about her. She went on with her life after her time as Lori Partridge and the quiet pain of feeling love for David, but not being loved back. But now this private, vulnerable moment from her youth, one that she had never told anyone, was thrust into the public eye without her permission. Not as a private apology or a way to fix the rift between them, Cassidy's statement came as a sexy piece of information tucked in between stories of fame and wealth. It was a show of vulnerability for the sake of fame, a brief moment of nostalgia stripped of the feeling and situation that had made it unique. Not only did this invade Susan's privacy, it also hurt her deeply because it brought up a part of her life that she had hoped to never talk about again. In the years that followed, her silence said a lot. She didn't answer Cassidy's words in public, and she didn't try to change the story that was already out there. But the fact that she wouldn't recognize him and wouldn't be on any reunion shows or interviews made it clear. After this, she could never be friends with David Cassidy again. The wound that had been hidden inside her for a long time was now open to everyone, and it could never heal. Once they crossed that line, it could never be undone, and Susan Day's silence was the loudest thing she could do to respond. She was making a new life. Following the end of the show in 1974, Susan found herself in a difficult situation. Even though everyone still knew her as Lori Partridge, she was determined to be more than just a one-dimensional TV star. She wanted to get away from being typecast and make a new life for herself where she would be known for her skills instead of her past. As soon as she got the part of Grace Van Owen on LA Law, a groundbreaking legal thriller that started in the middle of the 1980s, she was on the right track. Grace was a very different person from the innocent, tuneful truck. She was a skilled and experienced lawyer. Susan's performance as Grace got her praise from critics and a number of prestigious awards, including a Golden Globe. It was a major turning point in her career. She wasn't just a person from the past that people like to remember. She was a well-known and respected actress who was known for giving nuanced performances and taking on parts with many layers. Many people were nostalgic for the Partridge Family in the 1990s, thanks to TV shows and hopes for a reunion. Susan's absence stood out even more during this time. VH1 fans begged for a reunion show, and ABC considered a one-time return show. Message boards and fan clubs were full of people who loved the show and begged for one more look at the family they had grown up with. It looked like the right time to get back together. The original group was around. People in the crowd were excited, and they missed the show a lot. Oh, one by one, the original cast members said they were interested in returning, but Susan Day didn't say anything. There were no interviews, comments, or public thoughts. There are a lot of stars who love to cash in on nostalgia at famous reunions, but Susan didn't want to talk to anyone. It was impossible to hear anything. A big change from the eager sounds of her old co-stars. Susan saw the Partridge Family as more than just a show. She was changed by that time for better or worse. The quiet that followed her choice was her way of taking back control of a story that other people had been telling for too long. That wasn't the only reason they didn't want to go to the gathering. She needed to protect her pride, her privacy, and her peace of mind. The real reason why they said no, the story that wasn't told about why Susan Day wouldn't go to any Partridge Family reunions was much more complicated and deep-seated than anyone first thought. People who worked on the show for a long time had been chatting about the real reason she wasn't there. David Cassidy. Many people thought Susan's quiet was because she wasn't interested, or because she chose not to say anything, but those who knew her well knew that it was because she felt betrayed by Cassidy. The wound had been there for a long time and got worse every year. It wasn't just hurt feelings or memory loss from when they were younger and worked together. The betrayal was much worse than a simple love misunderstanding. It was about them. It was an act of betrayal that broke their trust and destroyed the fragile bond they once had. True. One former coworker who spoke on the condition of anonymity said it best. The raw emotion was brutally honest. He's a bad guy. The words were filled with anger, sadness, and unresolved pain that people still felt years after the last episode of The Partridge Family aired. But this gap wasn't caused by the pain of a lost relationship. It wasn't the kind of hurt you'd expect from a love that wasn't returned or a crush from youth that had turned bad over time. Not at all. The anger was caused by something much bigger. It was about having faith. It had to do with privacy. It had to do with the line they had crossed. A holy line that Cassidy proudly walked in front of everyone to see. When David Cassidy's book came out, it broke Susan Day's world in ways that no one could have imagined. In those pages, Cassidy had stated that the two of them had spent the night together, a night that didn't seem important to him. But for Susan, it was a breach that made the world see her in a way she could never hide. The very private moment that they had shared in secret was now open to the world, where fans could enjoy it and be interested in it. David took advantage of the fact that she had put her trust in him, and he didn't say sorry for the hurt he had caused. The betrayal wasn't the sexual encounter itself, but how it was made fun of and used as material for his story. Susan thought that going to any gathering would be lying. She would have been dishonest to stay with the man who had publicly put her down. If they pretended that everything was okay and that the broken trust hadn't broken everything between them, they would have been lying about what had happened. Sude chose to be quiet because of this. She chose to be away. She chose honesty over the fake promise of a return. It got much harder along the way, but she kept her cool in the end. For the sake of anyone, but especially the guy who had broken their relationship beyond repair, she didn't want to go back to the past. A last goodbye. A last goodbye. When David Cassidy died on November 2017, the whole world felt sad and nostalgic. For many, he will always be the cute teen hero from the Partridge Family, the heartthrob who had captured the hearts of teens and parents alike. Fans all over the world took to social media to show how sad they were, filling timelines with memories, photos, and touching messages, not only for his fame, but also for the happiness he brought to the lives of those who loved him. But even though everyone was sad, there was one quiet that stood out. As Cassidy's sister Lori Partridge on the popular sitcom, Susan Day shared the screen with him. However, she did not pay respect to him in public, give an emotional interview, or acknowledge the loss. It was impossible to hear her. She didn't do anything big to show her sadness or think about what happened. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't because of lingering anger. It was an intentional choice, the last thing they could do to protect themselves. Susan had avoided thinking about the past for a long time. a past that was tainted by betrayals and sadness, no matter how shiny it was. She decided to grieve in her own way, at her own pace, away from the cameras and the public eye. While everyone came together to honor David's life, Susan Day went to a quiet place to keep the limit she had worked so hard to keep. The line that David Cassidy had crossed when he wasn't supposed to or casually, which still scared her. It was never going to happen. Fans never gave up on their dream of a Partridge Family reunion. Fans wanted to see the beloved group get back together, and there were even official attempts to do so. There were specials made. Documentaries were made. Fans begged for a return. And for that one bright moment when the Partridge Family would stand together and smile together like they did in the 1970s. But as time went on, that meeting stayed out of reach. People all over the world got to see bits and pieces of the Partridge Family through TV specials and anniversary parties, but their union that everyone hoped for, the one where all the living members stood shoulder to shoulder and basked in the love of their fans, never happened. Susan Days was one of the people who wasn't there at these events. She didn't want to take part, standing firm against the waves of nostalgia that had hit her former co-stars. Some people made guesses about her absence and asked why she hadn't shown up when so many others were enjoying the event. But Susan knew what to do. She had never wanted to live in the past because it was so often painful. Susan had long since moved on from her time with the Partridge Family. The show's history, its fans, and the return projects all made her think of a time when she had not fully healed. There was a time when her own pain was ignored for the sake of entertaining. She wasn't trying to avoid the love her fans had shown her by choosing to be missing. It was a quiet thing to say. There are some things in hurts that should never be brought up again. It's best to leave them right where they ended, behind closed doors and in the quiet parts of the past. The message was powerful even though it was hidden. Not every meeting is meant to happen. There are some things that should not be told. Some memories are too painful to bring up again. Susan Day's decision not to go back into the public eye was not an attempt to deny the past, but rather a statement about how important it is to find peace in one's own life. She had built a life far from the echoes of her previous fame, a life where she was in charge of her own story. People today are very interested in the past, nostalgia, and the idea of perfect reunions. Susan Day showed us that some things are better left behind. In some cases, the most important thing we can learn is to forget about the past. Have you ever been hurt when someone told someone else one of your secrets? What would you have thought if this became so widely known? Share your thoughts below. Enjoy your time, and we'll see you soon.